Histamine intolerance, known as histaminosis, often confused with allergy and every other food intolerance, but not for this group. And there's a quiz afterwards, all right? You got to get it right. When I went through medical school, we learned a couple things. One, that MS is the great mimic. When somebody had MS, multiple sclerosis, it could look like any other disease on the planet, the way the plaques could form. I'm going to submit today, in Europe they understand this better than us, we introduced this today for the first time in the U.S., that a histamine intolerance is the most dominant food intolerance in America and I think worldwide, and it's the great mimic of problems, making it incredibly difficult to diagnose because it's not just one symptom. Everybody's symptoms will be unique to them and their biology and their lifestyle. And I submit this slide to support that aspect. Not to be confusing, I want you to focus that this is histamine. Let's say that histamine comes in your diet. And it can come from orange juice or papaya or figs, shrimp, cheese, wine, alcohol, pickled, fermented, processed foods. And if histamine comes in the body, it can work. If you follow this outside mustard-colored chart, it can cause any of these symptoms. So somebody in the back of the room could have a headache and stomach cramps, but it happened 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours after eating. You don't necessarily think of that as something that caused from food. You might. But if you talk about, I have an arrhythmia, and I've got skin itching or irritation, you would not associate that with food, particularly when it happens at a later time. Many people have a runny nose, or they'll have asthma-like wheezing. Some people will have menstrual difficulties. No other food intolerance will have that broad array of symptoms from such a broad array of foods. Unknown, basically, in this country until now, that we can actually take care of that and help people get markedly better. So what is histamine? Histamine is one of the most important substances in our body. It's a biogenic amine. All it means is that it has effect on our body and it has an amino acid component to it. It is found throughout the body. In the brain, it's incredibly important for circadian rhythm, for sleep, for wakefulness. It's important in sexuality, for an erection. It's important for regulating the immune system. Your immune system works and operates by releasing histamine to make your cells more permeable, to allow immune substances and proteins into the cells to fix you. And when you get it in your diet, it can trigger symptoms in the body. Several processes of why it works and why it has problems. Yes, we all could have a genetic predisposition. For most people, it's a minor component. You don't make enough of this enzyme. But in most cases, we're having a diet, having pizza, red wine, having the shrimp with an avocado and aged cheese. All of them will have some level of histamine. Some a lot more than others. What is it caused from? The bacterial breakdown of our food. The longer it's stored, the more it's fermented, the longer that it's aged, that increases flavor, it increases maturity, increases histamine content. So many of those wonderful, flavorful foods we eat, their flavor is enhanced and caused by histamine and other biogenic amines, but for some people, they will cause a lot of discomfort. And also, in a modern world where almost everybody's on some form of drug, or 2, or 7, or older people, 19, it's crazy, but so many drugs inhibit your production of the enzyme that you should have to naturally break it down. And alcohol, while it's a great thing in moderation for anti-aging, stress relief, and long life people all seem to have a little alcohol each day. Alcohol decreases your ability to break down histamine while it increases your absorption of the histamine you have. So it's a double whammy that way. But take any of these across the board, and if you have a reduced activity of the enzyme that digests histamine, you are going to be hit. histamine intolerance, causing any of those symptoms that we saw across the board. In simplistic aspect, here's what should happen. You eat a food that you love, it goes into your digestive tract, and in your small intestine, your small intestine, if it's healthy, it makes DAO. It makes the enzyme that breaks down histamine. It's naturally there, should be in a healthy amount. And when it is, the DAO, naturally made in the lining of the small intestine, it takes histamine, breaks it down, and renders it just nutrition, renders it harmless. That's what should happen, and that's what we know for most people happens until we start under stress. We know how many people have reflux disease, have ulcers, have problems eating, are stressed out, eating junk food. Then that intestinal lining is not as healthy. And that intestinal lining also makes lactase for lactose intolerance. That lining also makes sucrase and maltase and all the other enzymes that should be there and present, but if they're not, you develop an intolerance because you're not digesting the food, you're overloaded with it, and when they stay in the GI tract, you have gas or bloating or cramping or diarrhea. When it's histamine, however, it doesn't stay necessarily in the GI tract, and we'll talk about that in a minute. DAO. This is a beautiful picture of what DAO looks like. It's in the intestinal tract. It should be degrading the biogenic amines. We'll talk about this because I'm talking about DAO and histamine because it's the specific enzyme that breaks it down. There is no other enzyme in the body that is specific and direct counterpart. We know if we eat proteins, our body makes proteases to digest protein. We have carbohydrates, we make amylases to digest carbohydrates. We have lipases that digest fat. Our pancreas and our body makes these enzymes to digest things. What we've now come to realize is that our small intestine makes a lot of other enzymes to digest other components of our diet that have not been discovered until recently being effective clinically in humans. DAO is a specific enzyme that you must be making in adequate amounts or supplementing with, and you can decrease those symptoms dramatically in real time. Here's probably the take-home slide. Most important, these dotted lines, we're inside the small intestine here. Let's pretend these biogenic amines is the food you just ate. Almost anything, the list of foods that could have biogenic amines, and you see histamine being the dominant one, but I don't want to leave out putrescine, could have an E, cadaverine, tyramine. How many people know what tyramine is? Let me see hands, just curious. Yeah. A lot of people avoid tyramine-containing foods from chocolate and cheese and stuff because it's so active in the body, can raise blood pressure, heartbeat, a lot of things. Even serotonin found in so many foods that we can eat. But these products were putrescine and cadaverine, discovered in 1845 because it's the smell of rotting flesh. In large amounts, it's toxic and smells horrible. It's the breakdown products of amino acids, of proteins. But it's present in foods. It's present in so many of the foods that you had for breakfast this morning and in other foods. As bacteria ferment, break down your food, these are little components. But what we've just learned in the last 10 years is that these are also, they were misnamed because in small amounts they're present in living cells and they look like they act as growth factors. And what is specific in breaking them down is DAO. DAO is the enzyme that when you get these in your diet, they're all can be very active, all based from an amino acid, a breakdown of amino acids. DAO breaks them into nutrition.